Good evening. My name is Jemma. Thanks so much for having Powerledger this evening. We're very excited to be part of the conference this week. I wouldn't really call it a keynote, I just wanted to say a few opening remarks in the lead into the panel discussion that I'll be having with a really amazing and high-powered group of entrepreneurs and leaders in Web3. In preparing for these remarks tonight, I was chatting with some of the panelists, and Stefan and I were discussing a couple of weeks ago that the US, tried to issue and sell more debt a couple of weeks ago, and the market wasn't buying. I think it was about $16 billion, and so they ended up having to purchase the debt themselves. And for some of you who've been tracking what's been happening with looking at new innovative ways to kind of keep the punch bowl going, as I think the Fed Reserve from like the 60s had said, the US government started to look at is going to issue a credit default swap to repackage some of its debt using stable coins. And initial comments thought this was a way to really keep the punch bowl going for a lot longer, but like more detailed analysis kind of shows it's really not going to touch the size of the $36 trillion of debt that we're up to, and we're adding the US is adding $2 trillion to that every year, and that's not including things like Social Security. And if you tally all that up, I think it could be as much as $100 trillion worth of debt. And so, that's quite sobering and concerning on one hand, but on the other, for investments that are hedged against inflation, which is, another way to kind of reduce the size of the debt, that's a great investment prospect. So gold and Bitcoin, I think, have a very exciting future amidst the kind of concerning, never-ending debt ceiling increases and whatnot. And you can see it's not just the US, which is starting to experience resistance to the market purchasing the debt. Obviously, in the UK, Liz Truss, very brief Prime Minister lost her position when she tried to issue gilts and the market said no. But more recently, you've seen in Japan the market not wanting to purchase Japanese debt. And if you look at the kind of macro situation in Europe, you've got this very high debt situation as well. So I think it's going to be very interesting times from like a macroeconomic perspective. And then if you kind of look at the situation with Web3, obviously we've got Trump version 2.0, which for many who've been in the space for a while is like a breath of fresh air with more regulatory clarity. Hi Olga, and happy birthday. And I think that's very exciting. So we've got a tailwind, and you're starting to see a lot more enthusiasm and kind of bullish outlooks coming into the market. And I think from the panelists tonight, I'm really interested to hear from them about what they're working on in the topic of decentralisation and DePIN. And hi Lily, welcome. And I've got a little graph that I wanted just to talk about. So, people think about decentralisation as something that is very Web3 specific, but it's actually been happening in all technologies pretty much. So if you just look at knowledge, it started off that churches held all the knowledge, and then the printing press basically started to decentralise knowledge. And then with the advent of newspapers, knowledge became centralised once more. And the promise of the internet was that it could democratise and decentralise knowledge. But now we've got censorship over the top of internet, which is obviously calling into question actually how, where there's centralised forces deciding what knowledge is disseminating, what can be said, and policing what's being said in many respects as well. So you've got that kind of arc of a particular topic which is changing through time, and then you've got new industries which are typically decentralised when they're nascent. So lots of small enterprise establish themselves and then they consolidate. So there's M&A. So there's kind of a natural arc of decentralisation and centralisation that's happening through time. And I think it's important to kind of set the context around that, because what is happening in Web3 in different sectors is different in each sector depending on where each of those sectors are in their own unique or specific arc. So what I wanted to do was invite the panelists onto the stage and begin a conversation really by asking each of them around what are they working on the topic of decentralisation and centralisation. And I'll just before I do that, I'll just talk to a couple of the things on the slide there. Can that slide go back?
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Thank you. Yeah, so in the case of electricity grids, which is what Powerledger is focused on in terms of tracking and tracing electricity, grids actually used to be decentralised. So small grids used to exist, and there was like a nationalisation program that happened in like many high-income OECD countries where the grids became interconnected and there were national grids. And we're seeing now actually a trend towards a more decentralisation with electricity generation as well, so not just poles and wires. So electricity remained unchanged for a century with big power stations from nuclear, coal, gas, bringing electricity to people's homes and businesses. And then in the past 30 years, you've had more decentralised solar and wind coming into the grid and having really a hybrid system, I would call it. And then centralised players offering electricity was really through government owning the poles and wires. And then pretty much in the Margaret Thatcher era, you had the beginning of deregulation and privatisation, which actually cut apart all of the grids, generation, transmission, network assets, and the selling of electricity, the retailing of electricity. So you've got this theme happening in electricity, the sector that we work in as well. A couple of other comments. In terms of centralisation, iOS release was an example of centralisation. Telecommunications Deregulations Act of 1996, which was under Bill Clinton, that is like an example of decentralisation, because prior to that, telcos were pretty much owned by big government players or big players. And I don't know if you're old enough to remember, making a long distance phone call costing like $2 a minute. But after that, many new internet service providers set up. And so there was a big wave of decentralisation through the telecommunications sector, which has continued today. But we've also seen consolidation in that sector as those players got bigger, and you've got like a number of large players that operate in that new space. So I think, and then I think Brexit as well. I think that the EU project was a mass project of centralisation, and then 2012, 2013 Brexit was the beginning of decentralisation, and I think there's other conversations around individual I think the trade wars that we're seeing with tariffs as well is like a level setting of all of these arrangements, which were very, very macro, and now individual countries making more decisions unilaterally rather than in an aggregate sense. So with that, I would be very delighted to invite my esteemed panelists onto the stage and start by posing some questions to them around the theme. So if you would mind, I wouldn't mind putting up the slide with the photographs of the panelists. And you can, yes. Beautiful. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Oliver Feldmeir. Where's that gone?
You just go ahead.
From Griffin AI. Welcome, Oliver. Ralf Glabischnig from Inacta Ventures. Alessandro Carli from Acurast, and Stefan from Truflation. Please join me on the stage. Please do have a seat. However you'd like, it's fine.
We
maybe I'll sit up this end, and then you guys can sit up there. Thank you so much.
One other one.
Welcome. So I'm going to start just with a broad question to each of you, so it'd be great just to get a brief comment. In terms of what you're working on, what would you say about where do you fit on the arc of centralisation versus decentralisation in the sector that you're working on? So maybe I'll start with Alessandro.
So basically it's, let me quickly say what it is that we're doing. Hello everyone, my name is Alessandro, I'm with Acurast. What we effectively do is we created a compute network that is decentralized, but fully powered by smartphones. Why smartphones? There are a couple of reasons for that. My background is in mobile security, so basically it all started with this high security chip that you have in each and every one of those phones. and then continued by realizing that it is the vast majority of compute available worldwide. So when it comes to decentralization in this case, we start seeing more and more of nowadays this push towards self-sovereignty, especially in the compute case, because you have more and more acceleration through AI that is pushing power towards these already very big and powerful tech giants, right? And this might all seem like a very ideological thing, but it's actually very, very, very real. One example is how the International Criminal Court basically decided in a way that Trump was not necessarily happy with, and they cut off their Microsoft accounts, basically cutting them completely out of any forms of communication, emails, and all their services. Long story short, this obviously is not the future that we want to see for humanity, where we basically just work and get replaced by compute that is sourced from giants, and that's what we do at Acurast.
Great, thank you. And then thanks for suggesting to just give a brief intro of what you're working on, your company, your title, and what you're doing. And then if you could just also explain the decentralization piece as well. Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you, Jemma, for hosting us, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Oliver with Griffin AI. What we do is we teach agents how to use blockchain technology. So building agents specific for blockchain specific use cases, so it's mostly around DeFi, about crypto finance and so on. And decentralization versus centralization, I think we are operating along the full spectrum. So some of our AI agents are using services like OpenAI. Some of them are running on self-hosted cloud services. We are now working with integration of decentralized compute providers. And on the far end of the extreme, we are operating AI agents on local distributed hardware. So it's trusted execution environments where basically the agent is run on a specific hardware chip sitting in a server. So I think we cover the entire bandwidth of centralization and decentralization, but really our key focus is on teaching agents how to make sense of all the DeFi crypto blockchain transactions.
Thanks, Oliver. So it sounds like in your field, it's a varying degrees of importance for it to be decentralized versus centralized. So you're using a mixture of things, whereas Alessandro is very focused in more absolute terms on decentralized.
Correct. For us, it's about being cutting edge, and some of the most cutting edge technology is still centralized. But at the same time, in the long run, we believe in a decentralized future because we don't want to give all the trust and all the power to a few big tech players, but we want to be able to host AI agents ourselves and control them in a decentralized way.
Thanks. We'll come back to you on AI agents in a minute. I've got some questions to ask you on that, but I'll turn to Ralf now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Ralf Glabischnig. I'm one of the founders of Inacta Ventures, Crypto Valley Association, Crypto Oasis, and some other stuff. What am I doing? I'm building technology. We are invested in a bit more than 100 projects at the moment, and decentralization versus centralization. Unfortunately, we are at the moment fully on the centralization path. So there was a vision 2014, 2015 of having a fight against the GAFA companies, smaller companies ruling, and when we see what happened the last few years, Binance, Tether, and a lot of other players, we have seen the fastest centralization ever. And I'm a little bit more worried about AI, even on that level, because when I look at OpenAI or Grok, decision making is centralized now. Before you have been Googling, you probably evaluated 20 or 30 different answers, and now the normal user gets one answer, and this answer is very confident. Most of the people will not ask, is this true or not? And there might be hallucinations in these answers and stuff like that. And I think we have to fight for decentralization, but the reality goes into centralization at the moment.
Got it. Thank you. Stefan.
Yeah, hi. Can you guys hear me? I'm Stefan. I'm the founder of the Truth Network. So we bring the truth. We do cryptographically verification of real-world data and then enable on-chain the calculation with that data. So you don't need to go index that data, take it off-chain, write a calculation to that data, and then write it back to the chain again. And one of our biggest applications that we've launched is Truflation, true inflation. Why did we launch true inflation? We focused on the US and the Argentinian markets because the governments there, Jerome Powell in specific, told us it was transitory. We realized it wasn't transitory. And then we had the Argentinian Department of Commerce head actually cheat on the inflation numbers, so much so that he went to jail. So he lied about it as well. So we experienced a 30% inflation over the last 4 years. What does that mean? That means we lose purchasing power. And that's why, for example, we have issues like the debt issue in the US. We have people cannot afford their houses anymore. So there are more houses. There's about $700 billion worth of housing market for sale by retail in the US because of these last 4 years or 5 years of true inflation of 33%.
So how decentralized would you say is Truflation?
So we started very centralized. So we built everything on a centralized SQL database, but we now have 6 validators that maintain and monitor and write data to those databases. They're whitelisted. It's not fully decentralized because the cost of data slows down all of the network. So how do we maintain speed and turnaround times
So it's kind of like an optimization of these 2 factors. Great.
and cost?
Thank you. Lily, welcome.
Hi, my name is Lily. Lily View. I'm president of the Solana Foundation. I work on a DePIN project called Solana. Also decentralized physical infrastructure network.
And how decentralized would you say Solana is? Like, how important is it and how decentralized is it in the scheme of things?
It's more decentralized than anyone who wants to hold onto the ETH bags would like to believe.
Fair enough. Well, thank you for just sort of setting the scene around what you're doing and where you see.
I can provide a factual answer to that as well.
Well, we would love to hear more from you, Lily, please.
It's like 1,500 validators all around the world. It's truly permissionless and also pretty fast, right? It's not as fast as if you have everything co-located in a single data center. That will always be true. But then those are the trade-offs that you make for instead of 10 milliseconds right now at 400 over the next couple of years, we'll bring that down. And the theme is always increased bandwidth, reduce latency. And I think the purpose of this DePIN project has always been financial markets infrastructure. So the closer you can get to very performance systems that you can have with, like the fiber and the microwaves and all those types of things, although arguably you'll never actually be at that point of, 5 milliseconds or whatever people can do between Chicago and New York these days. But then the trade-off of that is there are financial use cases outside of the extremely latency-sensitive types of things. This has always been about broadening financial access to both the buy side and the sell side. Buy side being, let's call it, the classic example of folks who live in highly inflationary economies and have no access to assets outside of whatever the monetary policy they're subject to, and then on the sell side. This is the part that people don't talk about nearly as much, but that is companies having access and issuers having access to capital markets, which is a tiny little pipe, even in the most robust capital market of the world, which is the United States. And even then, there are very few companies that are able to pay and can afford and also undergo that process in order to have access to liquidity. So the value proposition of this DePIN project is global liquidity.
I might just, my next question to each of you, I might just ask you firstly, because it builds on what you just said there, which is how does Solana think about strategically what projects it wants to bring onto the protocol? Are you being more of a broad church approach, or are you trying to target particular sectors?
Yeah, I think most of this industry thinks that just inherently believes that things are apps, because everyone comes from an app world. Everyone that worked in tech before worked on an app, largely speaking. And so I find this to be interesting now, whereas, for example, there's an ongoing conversation of why don't Solana we be more like Hyperliquid? Like, well, I mean, 10 different reasons, which is not to say that you don't want to be more performant to perps, but there's a lot of projects out there that take the app type of partnership model of we're going to have one stable coin that we do a deep partnership with, and we're going to work with one canonical BTC, and we're going to work with have an ecosystem of partners, and you make your choices, right? I think that there's something to be said for and that makes sense if you're an application. But if you are seeking to be sort of analogous to TCP/IP, then at least at the protocol layer, now you can talk about apps on top of that, but the protocol layer, you have to be something where all of the assets and all the ways to use those assets, well, let's talk about all the assets initially, have equal access, right? And so with money market funds, you're not going to enshrine a single money market fund, and in the same way, in the traditional finance world, there's I don't know how many money market funds, and that's fine. So that's what I see the role of generalized infrastructure being versus where I think actually most people spend their times, which is implicitly in the application world. And I think the worst of all answers is when people try to do asset chains. I mean, that one is doomed to fail. So I would suggest not doing that, not investing in that, not spending time on that one.
Got it, thank you. I'll come back to you in a minute and just dive a bit deeper around applications on that topic of focus. And whether, well, maybe a question in advance is it important to Solana for the applications to be decentralized in the way that they operate?
It depends on what the application is and needs to do. I think that when people got all into this whole sort of, the gaming era, which I think is my least favorite thing about crypto in the last 11 years, the gaming era, and people wanted to build fully on-chain games. The question is always, why? Why? And when people want to do SocialFi, we're like, why? And how does blockchain add value to the social app, and how does the social app add value to the blockchain as well? Do you actually want to stuff your chain full of fully on-chain why? Who does it make that better? And if you have to pay a fraction of a cent to something, I'm just going to give the less. So I think it just totally depends on the app. Now, the transactions that really matter to have on the blockchain are things where you're transacting value. And I think that's maybe one core principle that you have. There needs to be value transaction. Now, what's now defined as a transaction that transmits value is broader than the way we thought about that before blockchain, because blockchain is newly financialized new markets. I mean, heck, we even made pictures into $1 billion market. And so, what the definition of what is a financial market, what can be financialized has inherently been broadened in crypto. Okay. Taking that into account, therefore, it still comes down to a transaction of value is what is actually important to be on a blockchain. And those parts that are not having to do with transaction value are better served by using AWS.
Yeah, great. So you're not just an acolyte of decentralization for any old reason. There has to be a good reason to do it.
Decentralization, how does that add value to something that humans want? So decentralization adds value to something that humans want because it's harder to censor it. That's number one reason, right? And I would say that's one of the big reasons that has been, I think, particularly relevant over the last 5 years. And then the second one is by being decentralized, it means they're neutral and open. Imagine if TCP/IP was, we are American technology and not open source. Who would want to use it? Nobody but Americans. And would you have the same liquidity of eyeballs and attention that you have on the internet and content? No, you wouldn't, because people would still be stuck in basically online newspapers rather than truly global content liquidity. And so I think that's the other value of being permissionless, which is that you can be, you are acceptable to the largest set of potential users, which is everyone on the internet, 5.5 billion people.
Oliver, just building on what Lily's talked about there in terms of censorship, a lot of what is happening in AI, in decentralized AI, is focused on kind of addressing that concern. Could you perhaps talk to what you are working on And tell us, like, what are agents? Why are they needed? Like, tell us about this.
A couple of questions here to unpack. Maybe let me first start with AI agents, and that's what we focus on. So we don't build the big models, like the foundational models, the Llama, the DeepSeek, and so on. That's not our business. We focus on building and teaching AI agents how to interact with blockchain. Now, what is an AI agent? It's basically a software program that can act autonomously and transact and interact in an independent way with its own reasoning, with its own thinking process. And I think this is what nowadays everybody talks about it, hears about it. OpenAI is working on it, Meta is working on it, X.com, and pretty much Salesforce and everybody else. It's really a hot topic.
Why do we want them to think for themselves?
Like, I think for many of us, the breakthrough was really with GPT when it first came out, and it was a chatbot. It's basically this experience you can talk to really, really smart chatbot and be creative and talk to it. But that's just the beginning, and the potential with AI agents is not just to have somebody to talk to, but somebody who does the work for you. Somebody who's doing tasks that are repetitive, somebody that is doing tasks that are maybe highly analytical, that require advanced knowledge and skills that you might not have. Assistance, and you're fine with a centralized service. I don't know, if I want my AI agent to get me the latest crypto market prices, what's the price of Bitcoin today? Of course, maybe I have a super sensitive application behind it and I want it to be verifiable and so on, but in most cases I would just go to CoinMarketCap. So why would I oppose of having a centralized service now access CoinMarketCap? I'm fine with that. They are just care about speed and costs, and I'm good with it. But once transactions become more sensitive, once this AI agent is doing more sensitive stuff, maybe I'm not so happy anymore of leaving it into the black box, not knowing who makes the decision, who controls everything. If I want this AI agent now to trade my own crypto portfolio, I'm concerned now. I give it to some startup. Are they changing the code from one day to the next? What is happening with all this data, with all my private data? I start to get really concerned. And if I go into other use cases like health data, decentralized infrastructure, energy trading, healthcare data, and so on, it becomes even more critical. Who do you give this data to? Who has access to it? And what can they do with it? And for those types of use cases, then decentralized compute and decentralized AI really comes into play.
Great, thank you. Alessandro, your project, Acurast, is using old mobile phones for decentralized cloud and compute. How many mobile phones have you got on your network?
It's about 73,000 last time I checked.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Question for you. Will decentralized cloud and compute just be a fringe thing? Is it really ever going to touch the sides of the cloud market?
I think true decentralized compute will follow a very similar path to how, or what Bitcoin basically did, right? The only reason why today we do have an alternative which is digital to fiat, which we even take as a hedge to compared to inflation, is because it stayed true to decentralization from the start and never compromised on that on every step along the way, right? In the beginning, people were joking about it, and then at some point now, even nation states are kind of thinking about adopting it as treasuries, right? And I do believe that it's going to be very similar for decentralized compute, because if you take a look at now as well the whole AI hype and the latest movements, it becomes more and more clear that compute is power, and whenever you have power centralized, it will not be used for good, right? I mean, it's obvious. So what humans will be able to do is only counter-react to that by having a more democratic and a more decentralized structure, where basically this compute becomes available for whoever in the world, right? Because that's another thing, right? The entry barrier for compute is really, really high. you cannot afford or you cannot access the same compute that you do here in Switzerland in sub-Saharan Africa. It's simply not possible. Right? So just by thinking from a inherent push that humans will have towards that, I'm pretty sure that decentralized compute will not just stay niche. And many people don't realize that, but the vast majority of compute is already basically in your pockets, in your drawers, somewhere at home in the format of mobile devices, right? So already today, the compute is very much decentralized, but it's just not used that way, right? It's still controlled by centralized entities. So it's just a matter of time to unlock that.
How big will it get? How quick? Like, what?
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about mobile devices is by lowering these entry barriers. Now, I mean, I think decentralized compute in general will be bigger than every centralized stuff that has been out there. For the simple reason that you don't have the same capital expenses. You're basically completely offloading that investment onto your users who are investing into that compute, into that device regardless, right?
How much cheaper is it than AWS or Google?
That's another aspect, right? These devices are the most engineered devices that are available to humans. You have Apple that is generating more than half of their revenues from the iPhone alone. So it's not the iPad and the iPhone or the iPhone and the App Stores. No, it's just that piece of hardware that you carry around. And Apple alone invests $33 billion in R&D every single year, right? So what you're basically carrying around is really the most engineered piece of technology available to humans, and that also means that when it comes to compute efficiency, these devices are pretty much above everything else, right? So, long story short, the operating cost of compute mostly is just energy. These devices have the short-term nanometer technology in their chips, so never had the privilege to be constantly plugged into the power plug. That's why they excel at the watts per compute or compute per watt metric. So the cost structure is completely different. That's why I'm also so very bullish on this case, because ultimately, if you want to challenge these very much established players, you cannot just say, okay, we just utilize the very same hardware as they do. We utilize the very same data center as they do, and then we hope that our cost structure will be competitive in some way or form. That will just not work, right?
Can you share an application that people are building on this decentralized network of cloud storage? Yeah,
absolutely. So if you go on hub.acurast.com, there is actually an instant deploy button. And if you click on that, you can actually describe the website that you would like to see. And what is happening in the background is that a large language model is creating that website based on whatever it is that you described it, and then hosting it directly onto the network. So the hosting of websites is one of the use cases. Obviously, because we're coming from the decentralized world, right? My background was also we've been in crypto since 2015, building very early Bitcoin wallets back then. And many of the cases are also coming from that angle. So there is this project called XCBTC. What they basically do is they wrap and unwrap Bitcoin, similar to WBTC. But the very big difference is that you're actually able, with your wrapped version, to convert it back to the native Bitcoin on the native Bitcoin network without a taxable event, right? Because with WBTC, the only way that you can do that is by exchanging it for BTC, right? And that project is securing about 900 Bitcoins, which nowadays is about 100 million. And that's also powered entirely by Acurast and these secure elements that you have mentioned before, creating a trusted execution environment.
Those are Ralph's big
His spare ones.
I'm super surprised, and sorry for jumping in, but for me, energy is compute, and this power at the end of the day. And for me, centralized energy production is always more efficient than decentralized energy production. So centralized compute and big computation will be more efficient usually. But I hear the first time the way around you are telling it us. With the website, I would use the phrase of Lily, why host it decentralized if it's a normal website? So why decentralized? But
because then you can't be shut off like Parler.
So
there's a very good reason. Parler got shut down.
Yeah, I mean, depends on the website. Yeah, when we talk about the gaming website, probably it's not relevant. But coming back to that, on the other side, I think when you look into BTC and what you said, this is probably the most decentralized use case we have at the moment. And I look into everything, what keeps it a bit decentralized, and what probably adds compute power in another way now to BTC. And I'm a bit concerned of centralizing in the BTC world. So what we see with strategy, with the ETFs and so on, at the end is this locking up 2 million, 5 million, 10 million BTC, and the vision of using BTC for something useful ends up in, I can't unwrap my ETF and not my WBTC at the end of the day. And so coming back to that, I would love to learn more how you can be more efficient decentralized, but I understand that this device is more efficient than one calculator at a big data center.
I think another very interesting aspect that you're bringing up with that statement is that when we take a look at regions that currently don't have compute, right? For them, it's not just about placing a data center there and start offering the compute, because the project starts way earlier. Even if we take a look at something like Dubai, Saudi, Oman, like the GCC, those countries would like to invest millions and billions in data centers, but have the very big issue that the energy grid and their setup on how to source that energy is lacking behind. So that needs to be built first, and then they can eventually also start building that specific data center, which will require such a lot of energy. The other answer to that is that the hardware itself is more efficient because it never had the mobile devices never had the privilege of being plugged in, right? And you need to be able to carry around these powerhouses and be able to use them for 24 hours, right? I mean, think about that. It's already quite crazy. But the other thing is, with data centers, you add a lot of overhead with cooling. You add a lot of overhead with the whole data center not being completely used. Like, there are additional overhead to be calculated in there. Will you be able to run a cloud or run a compute cluster all consisting of mobile chip in a data center in a more efficient way? Well, probably yes, I agree with that. But ultimately, by offloading this completely in all the households, you can also profit from these things like solar power and whatnot.
Yeah. Thank you. May I ask a question to our host, Jemma? Ralf, you just brought up an interesting topic. Energy is compute. Compute is Bitcoin. Compute is AI. And just recently I saw quite a shocking story about, I believe it was Nashville in Tennessee, but don't take me down on that. There, Musk is building those huge, for X.com, for XAI, these huge data centers and compute centers. And they are putting gas generators that are burning gas, like 35 huge gas generators there, polluting the entire area, really harming the local population. There are cancer cases, asthma, people dying. They do it without all the authorizations. It's like really, really shocking at what lengths AI companies go to be able to get the energy they need to fund the operations. And I'm curious to see on Powerledger side, you're all about energy trading, sustainability, renewable energies, and so on. Do you see any trends emerging when it comes now to the increased consumption from AI and from Bitcoin, but that's probably not to the magnitude of what we see on the AI side.
I think that the hunger for energy is supplanting every other factor or consideration, and countries that have less bureaucracy and can put more generation online faster are going to be like the bigger players in the AI race. So what you're talking about there is like a workaround to try and get more energy generation in. The amount of roadmap for generation to meet the growing demand for AI is like staggering. I mean, it's actually unattainable because you cannot build that much infrastructure that fast. But there's so many things wrong with the conversation around energy, like the conversation about energy transition doesn't exist. It's a complete misnomer. We're in a state of energy expansion prior to AI, and now, in an accelerated form. And, Ralph's comment that, centralized power is cheaper, I wouldn't disagree with that. If you look at the total cost of energy, not just the levelized cost of energy from the generation asset, that is like transmission cost and distribution, if we add all of that up, the way that a lot of distributed power has been put in the grids was through subsidised feed-in tariffs, which is like a blunt price signal, which says build it indiscriminately wherever. So if you look at Germany, they built the generation in the north of the country, whereas the people are in the south, so then they had to spend billions in transmission and distribution lines, bringing electricity to people's homes and businesses, and Germany has the most expensive electricity in the world because of that. And all high-income OECD countries that have a lot of variable renewable energy did it through subsidised feed-in tariffs, and all have very high electricity costs. And I think that grid is, that system is why we had the blackouts as well in Spain and Portugal, and the kind of pennies dropping now that the kind of net zero strategy is broken, and it's just not fit for purpose. And I think we're seeing, I don't think that it's kind of hit the mainstream awareness yet, but AI is really pushing the conversation to its limits. And I think you're going to need like a kind of Doge for energy to actually get the amount of generation on board that countries that want to be big players in this space, or just start to participate in the first place. Because it's not just, I want to have like compute online. It's like, I don't want it to be subject to the Patriot Act and for an American company to actually be owning that, and the American government to get access to data that might be very important to a particular country. So I can see other reasons, not just about energy, where that is going to be significant. I don't know if I answered your question.
Many follow-ups, but
I might just turn the conversation to Stefan and ask, why do we care about inflation data? Like, so what if it's wrong? Okay, the price of things are going up, but the data associated with it, why is that important to us? Do we really care?
No, not anymore, because we need to find other money anyway because it's so high. No, seriously, I think we do care. It's a form of taxation, right? I think inflation is a way that the government issues and prints a lot of money, and what it does is debase the existing holding. And if you look today, savings, there's no point saving dollars, right? Why? Because we look at inflation, and that's only the cost of goods. The cost of goods go up maybe 3%. According to Truflation, it's now down at 2%, 1.9% actually. And so if you're seeing price of consumer goods go up that much, then that allows you to keep, your food on the table, keep family happy, etc. But it doesn't keep up with asset appreciation. And what we're seeing is money printer drives asset appreciation. We're at an all-time high again. We're above COVID times where we're printing more money. The M2 money supply is greater than it was during COVID. And so what does that mean? That means that asset prices are all going to go up, including crypto assets, physical assets, stocks, etc. And so how do we educate people that they can participate in that? And I think the best way to do that is allowing them to permissionlessly participate in other financial opportunities that they haven't been able to access. A hedge, right? What is that? That could be NFTs, that could be meme coins, that could be Bitcoin. You can choose whatever asset, and the people can choose whatever asset they want to invest in, and that we need to continue to thrive. Certain assets will rise to the top, and allowing people to participate in that, I think, is really why we're all here, or that's why I'm here at least.
Well, I would say it's, in addition to that, architecting the ground permissionless systems is particularly important because we all know that the CPI in any country has now become a political matter itself, the very definition of that, and it has always been, because then if you can point to this, if there's something which is not objective, there's an aspect of it which is subjective, but you can make other people believe that it actually is objective because I said so, then you can manipulate, you have a cover for whatever information manipulation you would like to undertake in order to convince people that even before you get to the narrative transitory inflation, that inflation is 7%. It's not actually 7%. How do you decide the basket? How do you decide the weight of the basket? And the transparency of that and the stickiness of that CPI is basically a meme, right? And so the adherence to that as a benchmark of how we make decisions itself, it becomes problematic. And even though it takes, I think we think that humans are much more rational than they actually are, and so we think that if we provide objective data, that people are actually going to do something with it, which is just not true. If you just look, for example, in the United States, and for years we were all told that, for example, Joe Biden was never been fitter, right? And any of the 2 eyes and ears knew that was obviously not true, but you weren't allowed to say it until it took the activation energy moment required 50 million people simultaneously seeing that this was not true in order for there to be a critical mass of decision making around that, right? So what does that tell us? Objective truth alone, without critical mass, is so objective truth is actually a social construct, right? The ability to action objective truth requires critical mass of humans mutually reinforcing one another's belief. And so creating permissionless systems create alternatives to create competition around CPI, right? To create composition around what that basket should be and gain adoption for that could also go wrong. You could also get a worse definition, but you could also potentially get a better one. And you also saw this happen, for example, in China, where anyone with eyes and ears and a nose in 2008 could walk around Beijing and be like, this is not fog because, by the way, we're in the middle of a desert. This is health-harming pollution. And so they censored all the data around this, and the only folks that were providing data was the air pollution monitor on the top of the US Embassy, providing very inconvenient hourly updates on the AQI in the capital, and certifying this was not fog. And that was the one permitted, diplomatically protected data source. So,
single source of truth.
Yes.
And I think that's why we got into this, right? It's like how one entity is giving you the narrative and telling you this inflation is so high, it's only transitory. And why is inflation so important, right? Why would you go after such a boring topic? Who cares about inflation, right? It's not, but actually it turns out that this is the one single metric that gives every government the right to print money. It gives them the right to define interest rates, how much you pay for money. And ultimately, that is then the tax that is burdened onto everybody. And if they can drive the narrative with that one single source of truth, they've killed everybody else. And now finally, Truflation has come to the top that we have now got banks, institutions, analysts, hedge fund managers, family offices, all using Truflation as the source of truth, and they don't believe the government numbers anymore. And so more and more, these institutions are beginning to find and trust an alternative source, which wasn't there 5 years ago. And now today we have it here. And so that is how, and I could say the same with Bitcoin. 10 years ago, nobody believed Bitcoin, right? How many treasuries do we have now running Bitcoin? Solana wasn't even here before, right? You didn't have pumped up fund. You didn't have meme coins, right? You didn't have any of these assets that were created that are today being adopted worldwide and is changing the system. Our system is changing. And we need to come to terms with that. And I think the world is not ready how this change is going to come.
Yeah, so what you're saying though is that the people that are waking up and actually getting the alternative data are making better decisions and stopping their assets from being depreciated and are actually in a better position to make money and at the very least not lose money.
So the subscribers to the Truflation dataset, and by the way, it's permissionless, it's free, so anybody can go and anybody can create their own index. So it's all that data is available for anybody to go build their own index. We've created a totally different basket. We've created a velocity where it's updated every single day. You don't need to wait 1 month for some guy to get on a stage and tell you how high inflation is. You have a 45-day lead time. And the investors that are subscribing to the data are taking advantage of that 45-day lead time. They're buying Bitcoin when they see trends shift. They're buying bonds or not buying bonds when the trends shift. And they're buying Dixie dollar, selling dollar when trends shift. So those are just some of the indicators that they're leveraging our data for.
Thank you. Ralf, you're in the game of investing. Tell us about a couple of your more recent investments that have a decentralization theme, and why did you make those investments, and why are you excited about them?
First of all, I have a favorite sentence of the evening. Inflation is another form of taxation. I would like to take the sentence from me away. I mean, this is quite simple, but really good, because then you start to care about inflation, because we care very much about taxation, and we are happy here in Zug usually, but this is really a very good way to think about it. Now coming back to the investment topics, as said before, I'm very interested in utilization of Bitcoin, so products which are building on Bitcoin, where you can do something with Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin is the best asset we ever created. I just checked on LinkedIn, Lily still has only the word Bitcoin there on LinkedIn. So she's with Solana, but Bitcoin is the first thing.
It's very complimentary.
Yeah,
everyone has asked us Solana's infrastructure.
I fully agree. You know, I personally believe we have only one new digital asset. This is Bitcoin. Everything else, what is cryptocurrencies, is a derivative of venture capital or private equity, in my personal opinion. So when I buy Solana, then I believe in the team behind Solana that they will drive value to the blockchain. When I buy Bitcoin, I believe that there's only 21 million Bitcoin, that no one will find Satoshi Nakamoto, and that this is an asset which is not under inflation. This is a big difference. So, and now projects which are bringing Bitcoin to other blockchains to unlock the potential for DeFi and similar things, I find super exciting. So Bitcoin OS is one of them, but we look into different ones. So this is decentralization number one. And the second thing on the other side, on the AI side, human-centric AI. So how can we find out what is deepfake? How can we protect ourselves in the future? I mean, when we see now videos created with the voice attached, I mean, you have no chance anymore to understand what is real and what is not. So we need to find technological solutions who help us to navigate in the future what is real and what is not. And we're looking into different startups at the moment exactly in that area, because I believe in 2 years, 3 years, we will have a big challenge on that side.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think there's a lot.
Omani Tech is one startup here, based out of Switzerland, by the way, with great backers behind. They're trying to get a hash out of videos and pictures and verify the hash that this video or picture is real at the end of the day. And you have a database where you can look at, is this video or this picture really deployed by this identity which is defined behind. So it's a bit the other way around. You verify if it's true, and so you need to verify, is this what you're seeing really true? So those are the topics.
Great. Oliver, you look like you wanted to say something?
I'm just playing around with some thought in my head, and well, both of you, Stefan, have brought it up, how Bitcoin and decentralization is changing the world, but at the same time, how things are becoming more centralized in the decentralized space. We have now all these ETFs, we now have the sovereigns getting into Bitcoin and other cryptos, we have more and more institutional money, we have the treasuries. While we're all in the crypto space for a long time, for us it was always something anti-establishment. But now we came to a point where we are looking, okay, is Trump pumping his bag, and what are the big corporates doing, what is BlackRock saying? So from being on the edge, on the fringe, we are now transitioning into mainstream. And I mean, for many of us, it was always the assumption Bitcoin will only get big once large capital is deployed and in a position to benefit from it. So on the one hand side, this makes me personally even a stronger holder of my Bitcoin. But at the same time, like, how will this change our industry? We will not be independent anymore. We will be at some point part of the establishment and part of the fake inflation numbers, and we will be a gateway for those big financial institutions and ultra-rich families to inflate the money away from normal people. So that is also for us as industry something we have to struggle with and find our answers to and make sense of it. Do we go now on with the edge and go into more and more crazy stuff, NFTs and under fun or whatever? Do we try to do something as anti-establishment by expanding our industry into other areas? Or do we double down on what works now, the Bitcoin and everything? I don't know. I don't have the answer.
I'll put that question to the panelists.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to go. I think I think both are going to live in parallel and both are going to work in parallel. I think we're going to see centralization around the creation of ETFs. I don't see that problem for Bitcoin. Bitcoin's limited, and it's who funds the miner. Yeah, I mean, Ethereum might be slightly different. It's proof of stake, right? So the more people more money you can aggregate, the more you can stake, the more direction it goes. I think I'm more excited around the permissionless route. We need to go the permissionless route. We do need to be compliant. We need to go and find new paths. We need to bring products to market without boundaries, without costs. Today, to launch an index, for example, or an ETF, you need $1 million, you need 12 months, you need lawyers, you need accountants, you need auditors, etc. to do that. To launch a meme coin, you can do that instantaneously. To launch an index, you can do that instantaneously with no cost, and you can pull in all real-world data, get that launched, get that validated in the market, and then you can decide, do you want to go part of the real world or stay in the decentralized world and the permissionless world where everybody should have access to all of these opportunities. What industry do you have out there where 20-year-old kids can have $5-6 billion companies? Even in Bitcoin miners, I mean, the miners were young kids that made lots of Bitcoin in the beginning, before any of us even talked about Bitcoin. They were all gamers that were playing games, and they used these NVIDIA computers, and they were mining in the background, and they made thousands of Bitcoin. And now they're today 30 years old, and they've made wealth that you have not seen anywhere else in the past. So I think we should continue to drive that, and we're not going to ask, if we ask for permission, wait for approval, get the government to give us a permission to do something, we're not going to get there. And I think the society will lose hope.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, waiting for regulation brings you to nothing at the end of the day. And I believe the way how we regulate today with KYC and AML and similar things costs billions of dollars, takes us also to nowhere. When you would do this in a more efficient way with AI and with the data behind it, it will be much smarter at the end of the day. But what should I say? I'm also not the biggest fan of pump.fun. When I heard about today that they want to raise $1 billion on a $4 billion valuation with a token sale of $7 billion, okay, probably it's not the best investment. Buy some Bitcoin, I would say, on that side. But do your own research. It's a lot of the things we have seen pumping, maybe NFTs a few years ago. Look where the NFTs are today. It's always an interesting experiment. It's then the question, what in the real world comes out of the experiments? And I believe we need these experiments to get to somewhere, because these experiments are in a space which is not regulated until the regulator steps in and tries to regulate it, and then it's gone at the end of the day. But it brings us to the next level. No.
But if you also look, I mean, pump.fun is just one example. I know everybody laughs about meme coins, but if you look at the tooling that has been built around all of this, the rapid deployment of liquidity, the rapid capability to work and interact with these coins in Telegram, in all sorts of sniping capability. I mean, all of these tools that weren't available beforehand have now become mass. I mean, I wouldn't say mass adoption because it's a very select few, but for the few that are using it, it has become tools that can be scaled up into other products and into other services.
Even the US president is using it.
Yeah, maybe he's using it too.
Lily, do you have any comments on meme coins in relation to what Stefan said?
I don't know why everyone always looks at me. Well, I think that if you look at the infrastructure that's tested live, infrastructure is held up for that. I don't know what other market has the world's #1 asset gets dropped on it on a Friday at 9:44 p.m. And 24/7, 365, well, 24/7 trading throughout the weekend, and handles all of that across a multitude of different venues and 1,500 different validators across the world. So when I think about that from an infrastructure standpoint, I think that's pretty awesome. NASDAQ was closed the entire time. And all of Wall Street was closed the entire time. And the only thing that was open was the internet, and therefore financial markets on the internet. And I don't think that crypto is only going to be for, let's call it, these sort of truly crypto-native assets. I don't think that's the only thing that these financial rails should be used for. They should be used for all of the assets that people want to use, find value in, and definitionally the range of assets that are going to exist on the blockchain in some tokenized or even just sort of natural form. Crypto-native form is definitionally larger than the $100 trillion worth of assets in the traditional finance world. Because there are entirely new things that can only be financialized when you have internet financial rails, blockchains. So it is actually the larger market and the more liquid market, and the broader distribution market is in every way going to be larger than the financial markets we have today. And unlocks sort of long tail buy side and long tail sell side, which I think are so significant I'm not even sure I would call them long tail anymore. So that's ultimately what the infrastructure is here to be able to do. And I think that, if you can test that with something which is, I see meme coins essentially production testnet fodder, and if you can test it with that, would you rather test it with that, or would you rather test it with your home mortgage? Well, no one wants to trade your home mortgages over the weekend anyways, but what would you rather test it with?
Just a question for you. NASDAQ has felt the threat from crypto, right? How do you feel? They said they want to go 24/7. Well, how do you think their infrastructure will stand up to a 24/7 trading market the way that your infrastructure now can handle that?
Well, I think they have various wrappers of things around them that ultimately are just monetized by lawyers. One of them is just all of the existing underlying kind of analog financial infrastructure. You've got your transfer agent and your clearing agent, and then we got the DTCC and the clearing agent and the transfer agent and the broker dealer before you can actually be on NASDAQ, and then who can actually be on, that's how you get on NASDAQ, who can actually be on NASDAQ. There's a whole other set of things you need to get to in order to be able to be on NASDAQ. And so there's not to say that all of that is unnecessary or bad, right? I would second and say some of that is the world has moved on from fax machines, okay? So that's part of it. And so there's part of this which is we now have a better solution. In the same way people still do deliver newspapers, but usually we still do get physical mail, but mostly we use email, right? So there's going to be a big shift just to better infrastructure that is more fit for purpose. And then there's also part of these rule books that are oriented around infrastructure that is outdated, so then some of that should probably go away. And then there's also some part which is probably actually the minority, which is just sort of nonsensical rules, things that really truly don't make sense. So for example, with tokenized stocks, we announced X stocks, which is a wrap broker-dealer product, is going to be permissionless on-chain first-day distribution of the Kraken and some other very large exchanges. And the interesting thing about that is it is open to ex-US. These are US stocks. They're open to ex-US, but it is illegal for Americans who have access to the tokenized US stock. Okay, so how did we get there? Well, cool.
Obama and Biden era.
I don't know. It's all of the above things, and the various thicket of rules that creates this very interesting phenomenon is like probably this thick and has been heavily credentialized by very smart people with JDs. Okay, so how do you even start to get through that and just say, okay, like the core thing that we need to have here is we need to have rules around disclosures and rules around ownership, and there's some very important governance things to have if the core nature of the asset is to be equity-like in that you get a share of the upside. Okay, so there's very important rules to put around that are ultimately decided by humans, and this is not like code as law is not sufficient necessarily. And then there's the other part of this is really just about the infrastructure that can simplify the back end for money to move, and that's not an insignificant thing.
We have been very lucky to get the insights of founders and entrepreneurs and pioneers in the real world, in how blockchain is powering the next wave of real world infrastructure. I'm going to ask the panelists a closing comment before we finish up. And the question is, what are you focused on between now and the end of the year? Just to give people what it is that you're doing in your business or your protocol. Please, Alessandro, would you mind going first?
Yeah, sure. So we'll have our mainnet launch actually this year. This means that that will certainly be one of the focus points. But the other thing is obviously growth and making this as visible as possible.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. For us, I didn't know where to start. It's just running. So many things to do, hundreds of things to do. Every week, every day, we have 10 agent ideas, what we wish we could develop and what we are building on. So that will just continue. What I was probably the most eager for this year of launching a first set of real autonomous agents that interact with blockchain technology and making that as a proof of concept work. That's my biggest excitement. And apart from that, also on the fundraising side, on the token launch side, that is the second big topic.
Great, thank you. Ralf?
I'm trying to follow up what AI is doing this year. I'm trying to learn every day, and it's going so fast that I don't have enough time to see what's happening. So I believe the next 5 years it will change all of our jobs, all of our environment, and I think it's key to be this year only close to see what's happening.
Thank you. Stefan?
Yeah, so index.fun. Check that out. That's what I'm talking about.
That's pretty good.
$8 billion?
$800 billion. So there's a thematic index market of $800 billion. It goes through that process that I talked about earlier. You need $1 million to launch an index. You need approvals. You need licenses. You need compliance, etc., etc. It takes you 12 months to get that to market, and then you don't even know if the market wants it. Based on the trends and the speed and the evolution of trends, we've spent the last 4 years bringing real-world event data to the chain. So now that we have all of this event data, how do we allow anybody to create an index? So you can go and create your index. We have people coming up with OnlyFans index, YouPorn index. We have, rainy Brazil coffee stress indicator index. So we have all of these creative ideas that people are coming up with that some will professionalize, some will be a fad, will come today, tomorrow, and then eggflation. We have eggflation. You can trade eggs today, predicted going up tomorrow or down tomorrow. And then I'll be able to buy long eggs. Maybe even Heads and Shoulders dandruff shampoo someday. So that's the market that we're launching. It's live now. You can go and start trading up or down on specific indexes.
Beautiful, thank you. Lily?
Solana's going to be the best place for capital. This is an order of operations. You want to have the best network. That takes time. Then you want to be the best place for developers, and this is additive, not a choice. And then the next thing is be the best place for capital. I think that blockchain has always been about financial infrastructure. We went through this period of 21, 22 when people thought that consumer, and Web 2.5 was Web 3, and it's not. This has always been about markets, and that's what I think the purpose of every blockchain outside of Bitcoin is.
And so we've got to get indexes onto Solana.
That's actually pretty cool because if you have an index, then that can become an Oracle feed, and then you need to have an Oracle feed in order to be able to create a market around it.
I sense there's going to be some follow-up conversations from the panel. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists tonight for this very interesting